Welcome back. Our next speaker is Simona Clausnitzer. After receiving a BA in geology, Simona traveled the country and world working seasonally as a ranger for the National Park Service, a field assistant on various ecology projects, and a naturalist aboard tall ships and catamarans. At Scripps, she is focused on communicating the impacts of climate change on people and stories of resilience in coastal communities. She brings her exuberant energy to learning and is most happy when she's diving, tending her garden, and dancing. The title of Simona's presentation is Wandering Through the Waters, Conceptualizing Marine Climate Justice Through Printmaking.
I'd like to start this presentation by taking 10 quiet seconds in whatever part of the world you're joining us from to consider. How does climate change impact me right now at home? If you're here in California, your answers could look like wildfires impacting your air quality or house. This image is from the Kincaid fire in Sonoma County last year. Or it could look like stronger and more frequent heat waves. This is the weather report during a heat wave in 2018. Or quite likely, you could have actually drawn a blank. Many of us, me included, are privileged to not feel the burdens of climate change on a personal level. Stories of the polar bears are alarming, but they don't impact us day to day. And even weather events like heat waves can be mitigated if we have access to an indoor job, relative good health, and water. But this is not the situation globally, and this isn't even the situation for everyone here in San Diego. My capstone uses the tools of phenomenology and discourse analysis to conceptualize climate justice and my own relationship to it. As someone who grew up with one toe in the arts and one in the sciences, I am then making my own body of work using the technique of printmaking to communicate and further unpack the many intersections of social justice and climate change. Phenomenology is the study of how people make meaning of their lived experience. Here we look at human perception of phenomena and how we create meaning. Since I'm looking at the social justice side of climate change, assessing my own and others' socially based conceptualizations of climate change is valuable. And I'd like to share an example with you. On October 29th, 2012, I was a student in Woods Hole, Massachusetts, a mostly white, middle-upper-class town near Cape Cod. Hurricane Sandy was hitting the coastline, and the most we got was a heavy dose of rain and a temporary power outage that lasted about an evening. And this was because the center of the storm was actually hitting a couple hundred miles south of us in New York City. But here's the thing. Even if I was living down there, I might have lost power for about a week, but I probably wouldn't have fared all that much worse than I did. The storm was indeed devastating, but some of its impacts were divided. As a beneficiary of white privilege, a liberal arts education, and a middle-class family, the impacts I would have faced were substantially lower than other community members. The New York City Housing Authority is the largest public housing authority in North America, home to more than 400,000 New Yorkers. If it itself was a city, it would rank 21st in population size in the United States. During Sandy, 80,000 of its residents lost power, heat, and hot water. It took New York utilities 13 days to restore power to about 95% of its customers, but it took 21 days to restore most of these 80,000 housing authority residents to their full power, heat, and hot water. And even still, New York City is a heavily developed city with allocated resources from the federal government. Puerto Rico, who also should be receiving similar support as a territory of the United States, went 328 days until full power was restored after Hurricane Maria. By taking the phenomenological approach, it becomes very clear and suddenly very personal. Climate change is a social justice issue, and we are all connected to it in nuanced ways, even if you drew a blank earlier. By assessing my own experiences and then looking outward, we can tell its impacts are not evenly distributed across societies. In fact, they're divided by things like class, race, nationality, gender. They're aggravated by war, colonialism, uneven distribution of wealth, and overconsumption. They intensify already existing injustices like gender-based violence, the lack of indigenous land rights, unequal access to medical care, and racism. Phenomenology can help contextualize your own experiences, but then how we begin to engage with these ideas becomes important. A tool to assess our outward engagement is discourse analysis, an investigation of how we talk about something. By analyzing how we write or speak about climate justice, we can more deeply understand the narratives that are at play, what might be problematic, and where there are holes in communication. Part of this includes unpacking my own positionality. I try to continually engage in a process of critiquing my own discourse, and this is a critical part of my capstone, a dynamic process of unlearning and relearning about climate justice and how I connect to it. I grew up with the popularized discourse of go green, reduce, reuse, recycle, buy solar panels and electric cars, eat only organic. But this often doesn't go a step beyond to understand and mitigate their impacts on other communities, like the lithium mining in the Atacama Desert of Chile to extract the materials to then make those electric cars, or the communities on the other side of the world that we ship our recycling to. These messages don't always acknowledge the very real social injustices that we find when we're using the phenomenological approach. There are other ways of holding discourse that do begin to tackle these linkages. This diagram from the Climate Justice Alliance highlights our need for overarching system change, shifting away from extraction and exploitation towards social ecological well-being and cooperation. In the next phase of my project, from now until September, as I delve into the art form of printmaking, I want to consider this disconnect between climate discourse and climate experience and play with some of these ideas and symbols visually. I'm focused on printmaking specifically because it's a form of art that has historically been used in social movements around the world. This piece is by German printmaker Kathe Kollwitz, representing themes of women and world wars in the 1900s. As my capstone deliverable, I am creating my own body of work to continue the trajectory of printmaking as a social justice tool, while bringing in the contemporary themes of climate justice, situating myself within this framework. I want to bring us back to this graph for a moment. One particularly timely part of this diagram is the governance segment. Police brutality towards Black and Indigenous people of color disproportionately impacts the people who are already being hit the hardest by environmental collapse. According to the NAACP, race is the #1 indicator for the placement of toxic facilities in this country. Our systems are still pushing people of color into some of the worst imaginable living conditions and then violently policing them for existing. What we are seeing around the country now might not outwardly connect to climate justice, but a shift from militarism to deep democracy will be one of the pillars in a just transition from an extractive economy to a regenerative one. Climate justice needs racial justice, needs equitable systems of governance. Before moving forward with this presentation, I want to pause. Too often we slip past these issues quickly and we don't take time to properly acknowledge and honor the people we've lost and the people out there still fighting for justice. I'd like to make space for a moment of silence to honor Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and Ahmaud Arbery, and the many other Black lives lost to police murder and systemic racism. We each have a responsibility to educate ourselves, to critically examine our own positionality, and to follow the lead of Black leadership as we work towards transformation. This work will be ongoing, and it starts right here. Right now, community members around the country are out organizing and reimagining what some of these transitions could look like. If you care about climate change and your community, I'd encourage you to engage. And how you can engage can look different depending on your skill sets. We need people tackling the hard questions from different angles, and we need a diversification of perspectives to build new discourses and construct new systems. This diagram, made by Deepa Iyer of Solidarity Is and the Building Movement Project, is a tool we can use to think about how we can each contribute to building social change. The goals are here in the center, and the roles are on the outside here. I identify as a weaver up at the top. I'm really good at making conceptual connections between ideas, people, movements, places. But we need all of these other roles too. And I can almost guarantee that every person listening right now has at least one of these skills. If we can each identify those skills, we can put our energy towards these goals in a way that's sustainable for us to maintain, because this work will not end when it's no longer in the public eye. For us to tackle climate change, we need to commit to advocating long-term for climate justice, and that includes committing to dismantling racism and systems that uphold white supremacy as well. We cannot decouple sustainable environments from sustainable communities. I started by inviting you to think about your personal relationship with climate change. Ending in the same vein, I invite you to keep thinking. If you're paralyzed by the question, how can we stop climate change? May I suggest shifting your questions? How can I show up to support my community? How does my privilege shape my thinking? And how can we shift our systems to caring for our people and the planet? I want to thank my Capstone Advisory Committee, the program staff, and my cohort for supporting me through this process. I've learned a lot, and I'm excited to keep working on this project until September. Any questions?
Thank you, Simona. So you mentioned that you'll be engaging in printmaking as a technique. I wondered if you could tell us what specific printmaking technique you'll be using and why you decided on printmaking.
Absolutely. I'll be doing lino cuts, which is a form of printmaking where you take a linoleum block. It's kind of like this plastic-like material, and you carve away into it, and then you roll ink onto it, and you run it through a printing press. And it's a way to make kind of pretty bold graphic images in a reproducible way that you can make multiple of them. It's been used historically throughout social justice movements for a long time, in addition to screen printing and many other forms of printmaking. And it's something that I grew up doing as a graduate of one of the art schools in Boston and as the daughter of a painter. So it feels pretty close to home.
That's great. And can you tell us more about your next steps as you finish your project through September?
Absolutely. So for the past 10 weeks, I've been really focusing on the phenomenological approach and the discourse analysis. And then taking that now, I'm going to be starting to think about different symbols and visual images that I can start integrating into more cohesive pieces. So that's going to look like a lot of sketching and a lot of brainstorming and thinking about different parts of art making, and then I'll start actually drawing those onto the linoleum blocks, carving away at them, and then printing them.
Thank you. So we have a question coming in from the web from Sarah in San Diego. Where will you be showing and sharing your prints and messaging?
That's a great question. I'm hopeful that come September, I'll be able to find a small space here in San Diego to have a little gallery opening. But that definitely depends on the pandemic and what's happening with the status of us being open. I'll definitely have some sort of showing, be it digitally or in person.
Great. And then we have another question from the web. What can you say about the ability of low-income communities in the U.S. to engage in climate action?
I think it's really important that all people from all different communities are engaging, but it also is definitely important to think about ourselves and our own positionality, and as advocates, how we really need to start thinking about dismantling these systems and not putting that burden on the people who are already being impacted by those things. It's not the responsibility for low-income people or people of color to change these systems. It's all of our responsibility, especially as allies in that fight. Thank you.